The Science of Learning Research Centre is a special research initiative of the Australian Research Council. The SLRC brings together 25 of Australia's leading researchers in cognitive psychology, education and neuroscience with one shared goal: to improve learning outcomes for Australians. At the heart of this new initiative is a state-of-the-art research classroom constructed to optimise the study of learning interactions, called the Science of Learning Research Classroom. Located within the Graduate School of Education at the University of Melbourne, this facility will help researchers to better understand the learning process through studying the social interactions between students and teachers. The Melbourne classroom features technology that enables an extremely fine-grained documentation of classroom events. Key features include 16 channels of high-definition video and 32 channels of audio capture. Customised LED room lighting and device capture systems ensure high-quality visual data is generated. More than 20 partner institutions and organisations, both local and international, can then collaborate in the cloud via a digital asset management system. The new facility opens up exciting new opportunities for research into the social interactions by which learning in classrooms might be understood and promoted. We are delighted to have you join us for the launch of the Science of Learning Research Classroom.
Thank you, David, and thanks for the video. As David indicated, my name is Margaret Schill. I'm the Provost at the University of Melbourne, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you all here today to this opening ceremony. I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where this event is taking place, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. It's a great pleasure to welcome Senator Scott Ryan, the Parliamentary Secretary for Education Minister Christopher Pyne, and a Melbourne alumnus who spent some time in this building, he tells me, on the way in. So it's wonderful to have you back for this auspicious event. It's also my very great pleasure to welcome Fiona Cameron, Executive Director of Biological Sciences and Biotechnology at the ARC, and wonderful to see that Fiona's thriving. She joined the ARC just as I was leaving, so we didn't interact for a very long period, but I'm here continuing to hear great things. We have an apology from the Minister for Education in Victoria, James Merlino, and we have various members of the Centre. David Clark here from the University of Melbourne. We have our Dean, Field Rickards. Where are you, Field? And John Hattie, his colleague here, and also Pankaj Shah from the University of Queensland, our partners, and also from representatives from a range of other partners. If you might indulge me a little bit, I was actually involved in the genesis of this centre, so I thought I might tell you the story of how it came to be, and it indirectly relates to how I came to be at Melbourne. So some years ago, and I think it would have been about 2009, I took a call from the then Chief Scientist, Penny Sackett, and said, we've just been up to the Prime Minister's office and they want a working party on knowledge transformation and knowledge transmission and new ways of learning. And I need a member of what was then PEMSEC to chair that working group, and would I do it? And I, through gritted teeth in a busy workload, thought, okay, I'll do that. And I had the privilege of then drawing together a great group of people from all those disciplines that we had represented there. So Perry Bartlett from UQ on the neuroscience side, Lorraine Graham, who's joined us here, Bob Woods, who was here from the business school and is a cognitive psychologist, and a number of other people from around the sector. And we spent about, as you do with these PEMSEC working parties, 3 or 4 months working on what were the new trends in learning and knowledge transmission in particular, and came up with a view that we really needed to invest in the science of learning more broadly in Australia. And the ambition at the time was $50 million. We had great support from the Prime Minister at the time, and then things happened and politics intervened, and it sort of went on the back burner a little bit and I was really struggling to find a co-partner to invest in this. The ARC had some money to put towards it. And we were struggling to go and get it up without a co-partner. The Department of Education at the time was very supportive and ended up providing some in-kind support, but wasn't able to provide any cash. And then around that time, the first round of the ERA results, the Excellence in Research for Australia, came out, and education as a discipline within Australia, exceptions of Melbourne, of course, did poorly. And so I was able to persuade the then Minister, Carr, that it was worth investing in this centre because it would also build our capacity in educational research in universities. And then a wonderful team of the ARC, together with colleagues in the Department of Education, put through the call for proposals and so on, all of which happened at arm's length after I'd left the ARC and came to Melbourne. But the bit about me ending up here was, for those of you, some of you may know my background was traditionally in research management, so I'd been a scientist, a DVC research running the ARC, and when I came to interview for the provost role here at Melbourne, which has got a very strong teaching and learning component, had I not chaired that working party and had the benefit of all those experts telling me for 6 months what were all the latest trends in teaching and learning, I absolutely would not have been credible as a provost candidate. So in many ways, for many ways, I'm indebted to this centre and this initiative, and Field may remember some of my answers in that interview, but I did a credible job of sounding like I knew what I was doing, and I'm still trying to keep that up. So it's wonderful to have been at the start of an initiative, and then to see it actually all come together as it's here, both in the construction of this lab, in the collaborations with ACR. Jeff Masters was also on that working party, and with colleagues at UQ and other places around the sector, and to have the opportunity to celebrate this today. So with that, that finishes my welcome, and I'll turn back over to David to continue with the rest of the proceedings. Thank you very much.
My notes only say thank you, Professor Shield, but I think I should say thank you very much. We're profoundly grateful for your initiating the entire exercise. Look, a little bit of history. The Science of Learning Research Classroom represents a quantum leap in our capacity to study the social interactions associated with learning in classrooms. Now, if you think of a classroom, and you're sitting in one, if you think of a classroom as a living communicative network where the nodes are people, each with their own capabilities, motivations and personal histories, then you get some sense of the complexity that we're struggling to understand. We've been filming in classrooms for many years now, and whatever steps we take to minimise the intrusion, it still looks a bit like invasive surgery. For precisely this reason, there's a limit to how many cameras you can take into a conventional classroom. And this places limits on what it's possible to document and what it's possible to study. In this new classroom, the actions and the interactions of an entire class and their teacher can be simultaneously recorded at a level of detail that simply wasn't possible previously. And this takes us into a new research paradigm, one where it's possible for us to exercise greater control over the learning environment and the students' learning experiences, but also where the actions of the teacher and of each individual student can be simultaneously recorded in fine detail for later analysis. This combination of control and precision will allow us to interrogate social theories of learning in new ways, generating new insights. It will also support the development of new hypotheses sufficiently precise for investigation by our colleagues from educational neuroscience in the partner facility at the University of Queensland. Now, the Science of Learning research classrooms already attracted international attention, and it'll be the catalyst for major research collaborations nationally and internationally. There is no comparable facility anywhere. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Senator the Honourable Scott Ryan, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Education and Training, who will launch this new facility. Senator Ryan.
Thank you very much to Dr. Fiona Cameron, to Professor Margaret Shield, to Professor Sarr and Professor David Clark. Thank you for that introduction. I should say that it was a long time ago I was in this building. It was 15 years ago, down on the second floor, when it had nothing to do with the education faculty, I should say. It was the Centre for Public Policy, when it was sort of some colonial outpost of the University of Melbourne in its great land grab, moving south towards the CBD. And there wasn't much around here at that point. It is a great pleasure to be back at Melbourne Uni. Because this is I do come back here quite a few times. This is the fourth faculty I've been back to launch something or open something or visit in this particular portfolio, which is a real privilege. It is, of course, at the fourth faculty that did not have me as a student or as a staff member, so I'm not sure what that says about my time here. But more seriously, I think I saw Maxine McHugh around, the former member of the House of Representatives, of a different side of politics, but I haven't said hello yet, but it's only appropriate we acknowledge her as well. I'd like to make special mention of Professor John Hattie, the Director of the Melbourne Education Research Institute here at Melbourne Uni, and of course Professor Rickards, who was mentioned earlier. Both are involved in Minister Pyne's Teacher Education Ministerial Advisory Group. Professor Rickards is a member of the group, and Professor Hattie, as the Chair of the Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership, are going to have a critical role in implementing the recommendations that group brought down. One of the things I've learnt in this role now, having been here for 18 months since this government took office, I don't have a background in education. My specialty when I was a graduate student was Commonwealth State Relations, which, as I've learnt in this role, is probably about as good a training as you can get for a lot of the debates in education. But more seriously is that we all went to school. Some of you have heard me tell this story before. My mother's a teacher. She's just retired after more than 40 years in a primary school. So I know, I've seen in my family, her brother is also a teacher, the lifelong commitment that teachers bring to educating children and preparing them for life, and the burdens we place upon them. But the other thing I've noticed about education is that we all went to school. We all did, mostly now, somewhere between 10 and 13 years of formal education, plus some time at a college or university or TAFE or something afterwards. And that gives people a degree of familiarity and a degree of ownership over what happens in our classrooms that is not present in virtually any other area of public policy. I joke that everyone votes and so everyone is an owner of democracy. But unlike a hospital where you only go to if you really have to, unlike an aged care facility which you might deal with parents or attend later in life yourself, we all went to school in our formative years. We all spent time in a classroom. We all grab the hand of a son or a daughter and walk them back through a classroom about 15 years after we leave. There are very few areas of public policy about which people feel such a degree of ownership, but also, importantly, a degree of experience. And this means that when we talk about education policy as politicians, as decision makers, as academic leaders, that we have to understand it is a little bit different. It's a little bit different because we're talking to people about something they feel they have a higher degree of ownership or experience over. If we go and speak to a health conference and listen to a group of doctors talk, there's an automatic assumption of, to use the economist language I sometimes refer to, an information asymmetry. We all think doctors, to a certain extent, have their 10 or 12 years training and have a degree of expertise. But we haven't always thought that about education. And can I say, as someone that's come into this portfolio without a specific background in education, I think that's one of my key learnings. But it's also something that all of us need to do better with the community at large. Because I finished high school in 1990, and I walk into a classroom now and they are utterly unrecognisable from what they were a quarter of a century ago. Imagine what it was like for people who left school at 16 or 18 years old, who might not, because my generation has children later in life, walk back in a classroom for 20 years. They are nothing like they once were. Yet, I don't know how much of a job we have done, and I say we collectively here, of explaining to parents why that change has taken place and why, when they walk in with Sally or John or whoever their child may be, the classroom is unrecognisable from their experience. Institutions like this, I think, play a very important role in that. And this facility, which I read about over the weekend, I think will continue to play a very important role, not only in generating the information that can tell us how do children learn, the evidence to actually no longer guess, but to design our education system and techniques about how we actually better teach our students, how we know they leave these classrooms with not only the knowledge, but also the skills to work, to participate, to live happily in a world that is much more complex than it was even when I left school, let alone when my parents left school. So my congratulations to all of those involved, and I know there is a great deal of collaboration here, led by the University of Queensland and 7 institutions all around the world, as well as, importantly, by state education departments who, we can't forget, run our schools for the majority of Australian students, but also non-government organisations that have a passion and expertise in this area. I think institutions like this will not only develop the evidence, but one thing we have to do is realise and remember that just as it is the job of experts to come up with what works best, partly it's also our job, and I say our collectively as well here, to actually talk this through with parents and teachers. Because when I first read about this, it was actually a little bit confronting to think there are all these video cameras here. It's not one of the aspects of my life that I have to assume that there's always a microphone or a camera nearby. I don't always enjoy that. I accepted different generations growing up with different levels of expectations. But we also need to use this evidence to talk to key decision makers and to give them, in my view, when they know what goes on in centres like this, a much greater degree of confidence in what happens in the classroom. Can I also actually reflect on what we do for teachers? Because I say this having seen a society that has put more and more expectations on teachers. I know there were social problems that we didn't always notice 20, 30, 40 years ago. The hidden toll of violence, of substance abuse, all those things were there. But when we train our teachers, I know that they're trained in things like mandatory reporting, which now exists in all states across Australia for suspected cases of abuse. Let's not also forget the teachers that were put out into the system 10, 20 or 30 years ago who might not have been trained in all the skills that we teach them in rooms like this today, because we do ask a lot of our teachers and we don't always remember that there are 20 or 30 years of teachers in the pipeline who are doing everything they can in a classroom, but sometimes we only talk about what we're teaching teachers today. So I know that that is a very big focus of work in centres like this and in universities like this, because I know that we all care about not only what our teachers do, but we also care about their welfare. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join you here again today. It's always great to come back to Melbourne Uni, and I look forward to actually hearing in more detail how this centre is going to work.
Many thanks, Senator Ryan, for your encouraging words and for the visible commitment by the government to supporting educational research. Speaking of which, the Australian Research Council is the major national body funding educational research, and so I'd like to invite Dr Fiona Cameron, Executive Director, Biological Sciences and Biotechnology at the ARC, to share her thoughts on the occasion of this launch.
Thank you, Professor Clark. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri people. I'd also like to pay respects to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians present. Thank you for inviting me to Melbourne University today to take part in this launch. It's always exciting to attend such things and it really is very impressive. I would also like to acknowledge Senator the Honourable Scott Ryan, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Education and Training, Professor Margaret Shield, Provost, the University of Melbourne. Thank you for your kind words. I might also mention, although Margaret said we didn't really cross over, she did stay long enough to employ me before she left. So I do say thank you for that. Professor Pankaj Sah, Director, wherever you are, there he is, right in the front, of course, of the ARC Science of Learning Research Centre, the University of Queensland. Professor David Clark, Director, International Centre for Classroom Research, University of Melbourne. Professor John Hattie, Director, Melbourne Education Research Institute, University of Melbourne. And Professor Field Rickards, Dean, Melbourne Graduate School of Education, the University of Melbourne. Staff, researchers of the University of Melbourne, and representatives of key partner organisations here today. I am delighted to be addressing you as the representative of Professor Aidan Byrne, CEO of the ARC, who sends his apologies for today's event. I am extremely impressed with this room and what I believe is sitting behind there, so that this room looks so normal. And there's all the 1984 stuff sitting behind there. So it looks tremendous, and I'm sure great things will come from it. So this classroom is part of the ARC Science of Learning Research Centre, which is funded as a special research initiative by the Australian Government through the Australian Research Council. The collaborations forged as part of the Science of Learning Research Centre 7 universities, the Australian Council for Educational Research, and 9 partner organisations are exceptionally strong. The Australian Research Council is particularly impressed by how far-reaching these collaborations are, as they speak well of an embedded research program. And I was very pleased to attend the meeting down at Flinders last year and to see friendly faces from there amongst the audience. That was a really interesting thing to attend and opportunity to interact with it. It is good to see effective collaborations in action. The ARC's mission is to deliver policy and programs that do advance Australian research and innovation globally and to benefit the community. In fulfilling this mission, the ARC plays a significant role in supporting collaboration, both national and international. The ARC provides funding opportunities that bring together researchers from across the globe and partner organisations to work together on a common goal. That is what we see here at the Science of Learning Research Centre, and it's an excellent forum to demonstrate many of those things. The new high-tech classroom will go a long way towards addressing a national and international challenge. And I see you have international partners who can dial straight in and watch all our little Aussie kids behaving themselves, I'm sure. As long as it's being switched on, they'll know when it's off. The challenge that this centre addresses is unique. It is a challenge at the core of everything we do, which is to understand how we learn. By collecting real data about classroom interactions and the learning process, this centre will play an important role in improving education for students, parents and teachers, and I might add, the country. Because learning underpins everything that we do, resolving the mystery at the heart of the learning process will have far-reaching consequences. Events like this one today are great moments to celebrate the research and strengths of the talented people who sit in this room right now. I do wish you every success in empowering a strong and important research program, and thank you for asking me.
Thank you, Dr. Cameron. To you for your words, and to the Australian Research Council for supporting the establishment of the Science of Learning Research Centre. We are confident of making a good return on that investment, and it's timely, therefore, at this point, to introduce the Director of the Science of Learning Research Centre, Professor Pankaj Sah from the University of Queensland. Thank you.
Well, thanks, David. And look, it's great to be here. And Professor Shield, thank you. I didn't know you were involved early on. And Senator Ryan, thank you for coming. And Fiona, it's lovely to see you again here. Look, the Science Learning, so this is one of the, I guess, central pieces of the Science Learning Research Centre. And this was established by the ARC in 2012. And really, it's a really forward-looking thing, and it's a great vision that people had to support something like this. Now, you've heard about education. The Science Learning Centre is actually a very broad church. And, for those of you who are in it, experimental neuroscience and cognitive neuroscience is in a stage of completely exploding around the world right now. Our understanding of how the brain works is moving at fantastic rate. Now, if you're in neuroscience, we always talk about disease. We talk about dementia, we talk about PTSD and things, but at the heart of it all is the learning process, and there's a tremendous effort being spent in Australia and overseas trying to understand how the brain learns. So what this centre wants to do is to use those findings from neuroscience and combine that with psychology and what's happening in the education sector to provide objective guidelines for education. Having been through school like all of you, we all hear about teaching practices, and I'd never thought about them before I got into the centre, really. But, in coming from an experimental science perspective, it looks a bit old hat, to be honest. And the way science works and the way neuroscience is operating with specific ideas, biologically based ideas. What we want to do is to drive the education sector based on objective biological measures. So at the heart of the centre are 2 classrooms, one at UQ and this one here. The UQ one is a physiological measures where, unlike here, when you come there, you will be hooked up to a machine, measuring your EEGs, measuring your blood pressure and your skin conductance. What we want to do is make physiological measurements to understand how learning takes place. And coupled with that, we have the Centre for Advanced Imaging in Brisbane as well, where we're putting people through scanners to understand how the brain learns. And what we want to do is to say, look, how do you tell when someone learns properly and how do you not tell it, rather than waiting 5 years and then having a committee which decides. So David, it's fantastic, your group. Look, congratulations. This is a wonderful place. And I haven't seen it for five or six months now, but it looks fantastic. And the cameras, in fact, are hidden. So if you come and visit the Brisbane classroom, nothing's hidden there. It's all up and open, and there's sort of wires hanging off you. Whereas in this place, there'll be a real classroom. So look, I'm sure this classroom will do wonderful things. And as other people have mentioned, our centre is very wide. It involves every state in Australia except Tasmania. And in the next round, we're hoping to bring them on board as well. So thank you, David. So I welcome the next speaker, John Hattie, who's a CI in our centre, and he's the director of the Melbourne Education Research Institute. David.
Thank you, Pankar, and it's great to be here today. Certainly following on the theme that Pankar introduced about translating the learning principles from neuropsychology, from the psychology world and the education world into the classroom. And we certainly have aggressive plans to make this translation. The translation that we're going to make to the schools is all going to be based on evidence, including simple things like everything we produce will be tested on teachers first to see whether they understand it, and if they don't, we've got it wrong. And how can we use the traditional forms of both print media, podcasts, video, and access to classrooms like this to get to the implications for teachers. I think the message that came out very clear from the beginning of this is that more of the same is not going to make the difference to Australia. And whilst a lot of the same of what we do out in schools, I think is pretty impressive. In fact, I think there's a lot of excellence around us in the schools. But how do we add to that and understanding how students learn, particularly given the new environments that they're placed on? And it's all underpinned, we think, by this classroom, by the classroom at UQ, and how we get that chain linked between the neuroscience, between the education, and between what's happening in education. How does it all interact? Because certainly learning is not only at the individual level and wiring all people up, it's also at the collaborative level, both between the teacher and the student and between the students. And the aim of all the work we're doing is how we make those links. Certainly I think we have the basis of that here with the 16 cameras, with the amount of detail that those cameras can hone into right to the very molecular level of what students are doing. We can add face recognition, emotional recorders and other equipment. And I think this will allow us to get to the cutting edge, both at the 3 and 4 year old age level sitting in this room on the mat, right through to university students and adults. One of the tasks that we're planning for this coming year is looking at assessment methods based on simulations. Asking students how they learn is not a very fruitful method. Asking us how we learn, many of us don't often know how we learn. We think we know how we learn, but how do we actually go about learning? And I think it's a really interesting observation to note that we have millions, if not billions, of tests of achievement. But how many tests and assessments of learning do teachers have at their fingertips to understand what actually is happening in that learning process? And certainly already, through part of the Science and Learning Centre, with Patrick Griffiths groups developing the collaborative problem-solving assessments, which are going to go into the next round of PISA, which I think is a major credit for the kind of work that's coming out of this centre. But also looking at measuring the work that's going on in confusion. And the group has worked out how we can measure confusion before students know they're confused, which leads to interesting questions. Similarly with feedback. We often know that people react to feedback before they even know they've made an error. Those moments when you go, what happened then? How do you actually monitor that and pick up that? Which will give a lot more ammunition and skills and availability to teachers to make differences. And certainly looking at feedback and how that can be optimised. And how different learning strategies, how they play out at certain times of the curriculum. I think the main thing is that this classroom allows us to make learning visible. And that's been a major theme of the work we're trying to do, is how to make our classrooms visible. So I want to join in thanking the government, thanking the ARC, thanking your impetus both there and here, and the people who have actually made this room happen. It has not been a trivial task to get it as innocuous looking as this, and I hope you have the chance to see what's behind there, and all will be revealed. So thank you very much, and I'd like to introduce the Dean of the Faculty of Education, Field Rickards, to speak to us.
John, thank you, and Senator Ryan, Dr. Cameron, Margaret Shield, distinguished guests and colleagues, thank you all for being part of this. I'd like to just say a couple of words about from a graduate school perspective. It's always satisfying to see such major projects come to fruition, and I'm delighted, as I've just said, that you're all here to help us celebrate. The Science of Learning Research Classroom combines several elements that are central to the graduate school's mission: research and scholarship, innovation, connection and engagement, and clinical teaching. I'd just like to say a word about each. Without doubt, this classroom will provide a site for world-class researchers to do world-class research. Scholars from overseas and indeed interstate will come here to work with us. But the classroom research here takes us into new territory. New questions can be posed, new answers can be found to old questions. This is possible because this new facility is innovative at every level and includes the capability to facilitate and study innovative instructional approaches. In particular, the use of new technologies to enhance learning. This can be studied more effectively in an environment capable of capturing the dynamic interaction between the student and the digital media, using multi-screen capture capacity to connect the instructional stimulus to the student response. Third, the classroom will also bring together researchers and teachers. It's doing so already to investigate not only the characteristics of good instructional practice, but also the nature of teacher learning, teacher selective attention, and teacher decision-making. As I just mentioned, partnerships have already been formed between school communities and researchers using this facility, and I welcome the representatives from the school communities who are here today. But finally, the graduate school also has a responsibility for teacher education. In recent years, as many of you know, the Master of Teaching has put into practice the principles of clinical education. It's fair to say that this program's had an impact both nationally and internationally. And the conception of the Science of Learning Research Classroom is entirely in harmony with the clinical approaches that characterises the MTeach. I look forward to the development of programs within the MTeach course, where this facility is used to support the pre-service teachers in the investigation and promotion of their own learning. So, David and team, this world-class facility is a credit to all of those that are involved, that have designed it, assembled it, thought about it. It's something that we can all take great pride, and I thank you for that. So on that note, I'll hand back to you, David.
Look, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Dean, Professor Rickards, for creating the environment in which a facility such as this could emerge. The international status that's currently enjoyed by the Melbourne Graduate School of Education is a direct consequence of the existence of an environment and a community in which such things can flourish. Now, they don't happen by accident, and I thank the Dean and I thank Professor Hattie for their leadership and support. This classroom is the physical embodiment of a new approach to classroom research, but it would have no physical existence at all without the untiring efforts of one Cameron Mitchell. Cam and I have worked together for more than a decade. The division of labour is quite clear. I create the problems and Cam finds the solutions. At this moment, we are physically located inside the technical solution to the problem of how can a classroom be constructed such that the actions of all participants can be continuously and simultaneously documented with minimal researcher intrusion in the learning environment. Assisted by fellow problem solver Reggie Bowman, Cameron has laboriously and meticulously crafted the solution to this problem. It is cutting edge, it is state of the art, and it will be the site of major research projects into the foreseeable future. Many thanks to Cam and Reggie. You will, in fact, all get a chance to meet them personally and to have a look through the control centre. Look, the other essential thank you is to the long-time Centre Coordinator for the International Centre of Classroom Research, Carmel Masiti. It's only through Carmel's meticulous organisation and untiring persistence that we're all here to celebrate this launch today. So thank you, Carmel. Thank you to everyone who's taken the trouble to be here to celebrate with us. Colleagues, friends and research partners, your presence is greatly appreciated, but your partnership is beyond price. Deep thanks to Dr. Cameron and to Senator Ryan. I hope we can interpret your presence here as recognition of the significance of this new research classroom. Beginnings are important. Thank you for your role in this one. We have an unmatched tool for our research, and it's now up to us to use it well. We're about to show you one more video. What else? On completion of the video, you will have the chance to visit the control room where you can meet the technical wizards Cam and Reggie. Look, thank you once again for being here today. I think we can consider the Science of Learning Research Classroom thoroughly launched.